Chapter 1: Innocent Arrival. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of Marcus's Jeep as they pulled into what had to be the most remote campsite any of them had ever seen. Pine trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their branches creating a canopy so thick that even the afternoon sun struggled to break through. The silence was absolute Tino highway noise, no distant voices, just the whisper of wind through ancient needles. "This is it?" Sarah peered through the passenger window, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "Site 47? Marcus checked the GPS one more time, though it had lost signal 20 minutes ago. According to the confirmation email, yeah, premium isolation experience, just like we wanted. Jake stretched as he climbed out of the back seat, his joints popping after the 4-hour drive. Premium isolation is right. "I haven't seen another car in an hour." He inhaled deeply, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. "God, smell that. Nothing but pine and freedom." "And possibly bears," Megan added, sliding out behind him with their cooler. Her red hair caught the filtered sunlight as she surveyed their surroundings. "Please tell me someone remembered bear spray." "Relax," Marcus laughed, popping the tailgate. "This place has been operating for decades. If there were serious bear problems, they wouldn't let people camp here." That's when they heard the footsteps, deliberate, measured, approaching through the trees with the confidence of someone who knew these woods intimately. A man emerged from the shadows between the pines, and despite the warm afternoon, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Ranger Jenkins looked to be in his 60s, with gray hair beneath a worn campaign hat and eyes that seemed to see too much. His uniform was immaculate, pressed and clean despite his obvious time in the wilderness. What struck Sarah most was how he moved not with the casual gait of someone doing routine patrol, but with the purposeful stride of someone on a mission. "Afternoon, folks," he said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed disproportionate to a simple greeting. "You'd be the Patterson party, campsite 47. Marcus nodded, extending his hand for a shake that the ranger acknowledged but didn't seem to welcome. "That's us. Beautiful spot you've got here." "It is that." Jenkins' eyes swept over each of them with unsettling intensity, as if he were memorizing their faces. "Before you get settled, I need to go over some specific guidelines for this particular site." Jake rolled his eyes slightly. "Sure thing. Stay on trails, pack out trash. Don't feed the wildlife. We've done this before." "These guidelines are a bit more comprehensive." Jenkins pulled a laminated card from his shirt pocket, the kind usually reserved for emergency procedures. "First and most important, you are to remain within the designated boundaries at all times. You'll notice yellow tape marking the perimeter of your site. Under no circumstances should you cross those markers." Megan frowned. "Yellow tape? Like crime scene tape?" "Survey markers," Jenkins replied quickly, but his eyes flickered. "Old boundary survey. The point is, stay within those lines. Day and night, no exceptions." Sarah looked around, and sure enough, she could see flashes of yellow through the trees, forming what appeared to be a perfect rectangle around their campsite. "That seems specific. What's beyond the tape?" "Protected habitat. Sensitive ecosystem." The words came out rehearsed, like he'd given this explanation many times before. "Second rule, if you experience any unusual symptoms during your stay, you're to contact me immediately via the emergency radio in your psych kit." "Symptoms?" Marcus unpacked sleeping bags with increasing confusion. "What kind of symptoms?" "Fever, disorientation, unusual aggression, excessive salivation." Jenkins watched their faces carefully as he spoke. "Nausea, night sweats, any loss of consciousness. Anything that seems out of the ordinary for a normal camping experience." The four friends exchanged glances. Jake spoke for all of them. Dude, those sound like rabies symptoms. Are we camping in some kind of disease zone? Just precautions, Jenkins said, but he'd stepped back slightly, as if maintaining distance was suddenly important. This area has unique environmental factors. We found it's best to monitor visitors closely. Monitor? Sarah's unease was growing. Are you saying you'll be watching us? Regular check-ins. For your safety. His radio crackled to life, and he spoke into it quickly. Base, this is Jenkins. Package delivery complete at Site 47. Initiating standard protocols. The voice that responded was too distorted for them to make out, but Jenkins nodded grimly. Understood. Jenkins out. He turned back to them, and Sarah could have sworn his expression had hardened. Third rule: under no circumstances are you to attempt to leave the designated site between sunset and sunrise. The forest can be disorienting at night. People get lost. What if there's an emergency? Megan asked. Use the radio. I'll be monitoring all frequencies. He handed Marcus a heavy-duty radio unit that looked more military than Park Service. Channel 7. If you need anything at all, you call me first. Marcus hefted the radio, surprised by its weight. This seems like overkill for a weekend camping trip. Better safe than sorry. Jenkins was already backing away, but his eyes never left them. Enjoy your stay. Remember, yellow tape is your friend. Stay inside it, and you'll have a wonderful weekend. As he disappeared back into the trees, the four friends stood in confused silence. Finally, Jake broke the tension with forced laughter. Well, that wasn't ominous at all. What do you think, serial killer, or just really dedicated to his job? Probably deals with too many idiots who don't respect nature, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Let's just set up camp and try to enjoy ourselves. But as they began unpacking their gear, each of them found their eyes drifting to those yellow markers. And none of them could shake the feeling that they weren't marking the boundaries of their campsite, they were marking the boundaries of their cage. Chapter 2: First Cracks in Paradise. By evening, they'd managed to set up a decent camp despite the lingering unease from their encounter with Ranger Jenkins. Marcus had gotten a fire going, Megan had organized their food supplies with military precision, and Jake had strung up a tarp between two trees to create additional shelter. Sarah sat on a log they'd dragged near the fire ring, sketching the surrounding forest in her journal, but her drawings kept coming out darker than intended. Okay, I have to ask, she said as they shared a dinner of hot dogs and beans. Is anyone else getting weird vibes from this place? Jake speared another hot dog with his roasting stick. You mean besides the fact that we're apparently camping in some kind of open-air prison? It's not that bad, Marcus protested, though he'd been unconsciously glancing at the yellow tape markers every few minutes. So the ranger's a little intense. Maybe he's seen too many campers do stupid things. Like what? Megan challenged. Cross an invisible line in the forest? Since when do national parks have areas that are completely off limits to hikers? Protected habitats are a real thing, Marcus said, but even he sounded uncertain. Endangered species, sensitive ecosystems. Then why not put up proper signs explaining that? Sarah gestured toward the nearest yellow marker. Why make it sound like we'll catch some kind of disease if we step over a piece of tape? The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. In the growing darkness, the forest around them felt alive with unseen presence. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig seemed deliberate. Has anyone else noticed how quiet it is? Jake's voice had dropped to almost a whisper. I mean, really quiet. Shouldn't there be night sounds? Owls? Insects? Something? Now that he mentioned it, the silence was almost oppressive. The usual symphony of nocturnal forest life was completely absent, replaced by a stillness so complete it felt unnatural. Maybe we're just in a dead zone, Megan suggested, but she'd moved closer to the fire. Some areas have less wildlife. Or maybe, Sarah said slowly, the wildlife knows something we don't. A distant sound broke the silence, the distinctive crackle of a radio transmission. It was coming from somewhere beyond the yellow tape, too far away to make out words but close enough to know someone was out there. Someone was watching. Jesus, Jake muttered. How many rangers does this place have, and why are they posting guards around our campsite? Marcus stood up, peering into the darkness. Maybe I should call Jenkins on that radio, ask him what's going on. And say what? Hey, we're hearing mysterious radio chatter and it's freaking us out? Megan shook her head. He'll just give us more of that it's for your safety bullshit. But Sarah was already reaching for the radio unit. The heavy device felt cold in her hands, its multiple dials and switches more complex than anything she'd expected for simple park communication. She turned it on, and immediately heard voices, multiple voices, speaking in codes and numbers that meant nothing to her. Containment holding at perimeter points Alpha through Delta. No breach attempt since 1,400 hours. Vitals monitoring shows elevated stress but no symptoms. Sarah quickly turned the volume down, her heart racing. Guys, listen to this. They huddled around the radio as the transmissions continued, each one more unsettling than the last. Talk of containment, monitoring, symptoms, elevated protocols. It sounded less like park service communication and more like military. Jake finished her thought. That sounds like military communication. Or medical, Megan added. That talk about symptoms and monitoring it's like we're patients in some kind of study. Marcus took the radio from Sarah, his face pale in the firelight. There has to be an explanation. Maybe there's a research project going on nearby. Wildlife tracking, environmental monitoring. Then why didn't Jenkins just tell us that? Sarah demanded. Why all the secrecy and weird warnings? Another transmission cut through their conversation. Base, this is Perimeter 6. Subjects appear agitated but compliant. No attempts to breach containment. Recommend maintaining current protocols. The word subjects hit them like a physical blow. Sarah felt her stomach drop as the implications sank in. They weren't guests at this campsite, they were specimens under observation. We need to leave, she said quietly. Right now. Pack up and get out of here. It's after sunset, Jake reminded her. Jenkins said not to leave the site between sunset and sunrise. Fuck what Jenkins said. Megan stood up abruptly. If we're part of some kind of experiment, I'm not staying here to see how it ends. But Marcus was shaking his head. Think about it logically. We drove 4 hours to get here through some pretty remote country. I'm not even sure I could find the main road in the dark, especially without GPS, and that's assuming they'd let us leave. Let us? Sarah's voice cracked. Marcus, listen to yourself. You're talking like we're prisoners. Maybe we are, he said quietly. Maybe that's exactly what we are. The radio crackled again, and this time Jenkins's voice came through clearly. All units, be advised subjects, showing signs of elevated stress and discussion of departure. Recommend increased vigilance. We cannot afford a containment breach at this stage. They stared at the radio in horrified silence. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the yellow tape, people were watching them, listening to them, reporting on their every move and emotion. The campsite that had seemed like a peaceful retreat now felt like a lab cage. Tomorrow, Marcus said finally. First light, we pack up and leave. But tonight, we stay put. Whatever's going on here, wandering around in the dark isn't going to improve our situation. They agreed reluctantly, but sleep was out of the question. They took turns feeding the fire and watching the darkness, each of them jumping at every sound, real or imagined. And all around them, just beyond the yellow tape, they could sense present patient, watchful, waiting for something none of them understood. As the night wore on, Sarah began to notice that the radio transmissions were becoming more frequent and the tone more urgent. Something was building toward a climax, and they were apparently at the center of it. Whatever tomorrow brought, she had the sinking feeling that their weekend camping trip was about to become something much more dangerous. Chapter 3. The Rules Become Prison Bars. Dawn came gray and reluctant, filtering through the canopy in weak shafts that did little to dispel the shadows. None of them had slept well. Their night had been punctuated by distant radio chatter, the occasional snap of a twig that might have been footsteps, and the persistent feeling of being observed. Now, in the pale morning light, the yellow tape markers seemed more ominous than ever. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "New plan. We pack up, drive out, and find somewhere else to camp. Somewhere without mysterious rangers and military-grade radio chatter." But before they could begin breaking camp, Jenkins appeared at the edge of their sight. He moved with the same measured precision as the day before, but there was something different about him, now a tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept either. "Morning, folks," he called out, but stayed carefully on his side of the yellow tape. "Hope you had a restful night." "Not particularly," Sarah replied coldly. "We heard a lot of radio traffic. Care to explain what kind of operation you're running out here?" Jenkins' expression didn't change, but she saw his hand move unconsciously toward the radio on his belt. "Standard Park Service communications. Multiple sites to coordinate, safety protocols to maintain." "Bullshit." Jake stepped forward, stopping just short of the yellow line. "We heard talk about containment, subjects, monitoring. What the hell is this place really?" For a moment, Jenkins's mask slipped, and they saw something like desperation in his eyes, but it was gone quickly, replaced by official composure. "I think you folks might be getting a little cabin fever. Common thing in isolated locations. Why don't I radio for a doctor to come check you out?" "We don't need a doctor," Marcus said firmly. "We need to leave. We're packing up and heading out this morning." "I'm afraid that's not possible." Jenkins's voice had hardened. "Park regulations require a minimum 48-hour stay for this particular site. Environmental monitoring purposes." Megan laughed bitterly. "Environmental monitoring? Of what, us? Come on, we're not stupid. You've got us under surveillance. We're leaving, and you can't stop us." She took a step toward the yellow tape, and Jenkins immediately moved to block her path, his hand now resting openly on his radio. "Ma'am, I strongly advise you to remain within the designated boundaries." "Or what?" Sarah joined Megan at the tape line. "You'll arrest us for breaking campground rules?" "The consequences of leaving the designated area would be severe for everyone involved." Jenkins spoke the words like he was reading from a script, but there was genuine fear in his voice. "Please, just stay within the boundaries. Complete your 48-hour stay. Then you can leave safely." "Safely?" Jake moved closer to the confrontation. "What exactly are we unsafe from? What's out there beyond this tape?" Jenkins looked back over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure he wasn't being overheard. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Things you don't understand. Things that have been contained for 30 years, if you breach that perimeter." "If we breach it, what?" Marcus demanded. "What happens?" But Jenkins was already backing away, speaking into his radio in urgent, clipped sentences. "Base, this is Jenkins. Subjects are becoming non-compliant. Request immediate backup to reinforce perimeter. Repeat, containment may be compromised." The response crackled back immediately. "Copy, Jenkins. Units 7 and 12 en route. Maintain visual contact. Do not allow breach under any circumstances." Sarah felt ice water in her veins. Units? 7 and 12? How many people do you have out there? But Jenkins was gone, melted back into the forest with the same silent efficiency he'd used to appear. They were alone again, but the feeling of being watched had intensified dramatically. Somewhere in the trees around them, people were moving into position. "That's it," Megan declared. "I don't care what their consequences are. I'm not staying in this freak show another minute." Before anyone could stop her, she ducked under the yellow tape and stepped into the forest beyond. Nothing happened immediately. No alarms, no shouts, no sudden appearance of guards. She stood there for a moment, looking back at them triumphantly. "See? It's just tape. There's nothing." A dart appeared in her shoulder with a soft thunk, and she was on the ground before she could finish the sentence. Not unconscious, but paralyzed, her eyes wide with terror as figures in camouflage gear emerged from the underbrush to drag her back inside the perimeter. "Megan!" Sarah screamed, but Jake caught her arm before she could follow. One of the camouflaged figures looked up at them, a young man with military short hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too much. "She'll be fine in a few hours, but she stays inside the line. You all stay inside the line." "What did you do to her?" Marcus shouted. "Tranquilizer. Temporary paralysis. She'll recover, but if any of you try to cross that boundary again, the next dose will be permanent." The soldier's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "This is your only warning." They set Megan down just inside the yellow tape, her body limp but her eyes tracking movement, clearly conscious but unable to speak or move. The soldiers disappeared back into the forest as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving the three friends to tend to their paralyzed companion. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered, checking Megan's pulse. "They shot her with a dart gun, like she was a wild animal." Sarah was scanning the tree line, now seeing movement where before there had only been shadows. "How many of them are out there? This isn't park service, this is military." "Or worse," Marcus said grimly. He was studying the radio they'd been given, noting details he'd missed before. "Look at this thing. This isn't standard communication equipment. The frequency range, the encryption capabilities, this is designed for classified operations." As if summoned by their realization, Jenkins reappeared at the edge of their sight, but now he was accompanied by the soldier who'd shot Megan, and the ranger looked like a man who'd run out of options. "I tried to do this the easy way," Jenkins said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. 30 years I've been keeping this contained. 30 years of making sure nothing gets out. But you people, you couldn't just follow simple instructions." "Contained?" Sarah helped support Megan's paralyzed form. "What the hell are you containing? What is this place?" Jenkins looked at the soldier, who nodded grimly. "Tell them," the younger man said. "They're going to find out anyway, and maybe if they understand, they'll cooperate." The ranger took a deep breath, like a man about to confess to murder. "This isn't a campsite. It's a quarantine zone. Has been for 3 decades. And you 4. You're not campers. You're patients." The words hit them like physical blows. Sarah felt the world tilt around her as the implications sank in. "Patience? What do you mean, patience?" "You were exposed," Jenkins continued, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. "All 4 of you, 6 months ago. There was an incidenta breach at a research facility in Colorado. You were in the area when it happened. You've been under observation ever since." Marcus was shaking his head violently. "That's impossible. We would have known. We would have remembered." "Memory modification is part of the treatment protocol," the soldier explained clinically. "Reduces stress, improves compliance. You remember planning this camping trip, but you don't remember being recruited for it. You don't remember the medical evaluations, the psychological profiles, the decision to bring you here for final testing. Sarah's mind reeled as fragments of false memory clashed with emerging truth. The camping trip had been Jake's idea, hadn't it? Or had it been Marcus's? The more she tried to remember, the fuzzier the details became. Final testing for what? Jake demanded. Jenkins and the soldier exchanged another look, and Sarah realized with growing horror that they were about to learn something that would change everything. To see if you're still human, Jenkins said quietly, or if you're something else now, something that needs to be contained forever. Chapter 4. Breaking Point Rebellion. The paralysis wore off Megan gradually over the next few hours, feeling returning to her extremities in painful pins and needles. As sensation returned to her body, rage returned to her voice. "They drugged me," she said for the 10th time, flexing her fingers and testing her strength. "They actually shot me with a tranquilizer dart like I was some kind of dangerous animal." "According to them, we might be," Sarah said quietly. She'd been sitting in stunned silence since Jenkins's revelation, trying to process the idea that everything she remembered about the past 6 months might be fabricated. Marcus paced within their invisible cage, his engineering mind trying to find logical flaws in their captor's story. "None of this makes sense." If we were really exposed to something dangerous, there would be protocols, CDC involvement, proper medical facilities, not some sketchy military operation in the middle of nowhere. "Maybe there are protocols," Jake suggested darkly. "Maybe this is what they look like when the exposure is bad enough." They'd been left alone since the confrontation, but the sense of being watched had only intensified. Occasionally they caught glimpses of movement in the trees, the glint of binoculars or scope lenses, the brief flash of camouflage gear. Their captors weren't even trying to hide anymore. "I keep trying to remember Colorado," Megan said, rubbing her temples. 6 months ago, we were all there for Jake's cousin's wedding, right? But I can't remember anything specific. Not the ceremony, not the reception, not even the drive home." "That's because it didn't happen," Sarah realized with growing certainty. "At least, not the way we remember it. Think about it, when was the last time any of us saw Jake's cousin? Or talked about that wedding with other people? I bet if we called our families right now, they'd have completely different stories about where we were 6 months ago." "If they let us call anyone," Marcus added bitterly. He gestured toward the radio. "That thing's probably programmed to block outgoing calls. For all we know, our families think we're dead, or maybe they think we never existed." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of footsteps multiple sets, moving with military precision. Jenkins appeared first, followed by the soldier who'd shot Megan and 2 others they hadn't seen before. One carried what looked like medical equipment, while the other held a tablet that he consulted frequently. "Time for your daily evaluation," Jenkins announced, though his tone suggested this was anything but routine. "Evaluation of what?" Sarah stood up, putting herself between the newcomers and her friends. The Metasif, that's what he was, set down his equipment and began unpacking what looked like blood collection supplies. Standard monitoring protocol, vital signs, blood chemistry, neurological responses. Nothing invasive. "Like hell," Megan snarled. "You people have been lying to us from the beginning. We're not submitting to any more of your experiments." The soldier with the tablet looked up from his screen. "The cooperation of subjects is preferred but not required. We can administer the tests whether you're conscious or not." "Subjects," Jake repeated with disgust. "There's that word again. We're not your lab rats." "Actually," Jenkins said quietly, "that's exactly what you are. What you've been for 6 months. The only question now is whether you're going to be cooperative lab rats or difficult ones." Sarah felt something snap inside her, whether it was the condescending tone, the casual dehumanization, or simply the accumulation of lies and manipulation. She'd reached her breaking point. Without conscious thought, she found herself moving toward the yellow tape. "Sarah, don't," Marcus warned, but she was already ducking under the barrier. This time, she was ready for the darts. As soon as she cleared the tape, she rolled to the side and kept moving, zigzagging through the trees as shouts erupted behind her. She heard the soft puff of compressed air weapons, felt darts whistle past her head, but momentum and adrenaline carried her deeper into the forest. Behind her, chaos erupted at the campsite. Her friends, inspired by her break for freedom, scattered in different directions. The military precision of their captors dissolved into frantic pursuit as alarms began wailing from hidden speakers throughout the forest. Sarah ran blindly through the underbrush, branches tearing at her clothes and scratching her face. She had no destination except away, away from the lies, away from the experiments, away from the cage they'd built around her life. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, a maze of identical trees and shadows that offered no landmarks or guidance. But as she ran, she began to notice things that made her slow her desperate flight. Structures in the trees' platforms, sensors, cameras, hidden bunkers built into hillsides, their entrances camouflaged but still visible to someone looking for them. And most disturbing of all, other yellow tape barriers in the distance, marking off other rectangular sections of forest, other camps, other subjects. She was catching her breath behind a massive pine when she heard a sound that froze her blood, not the shouts of her pursuers or the crack of branches as they followed her trail, but something else entirely. A low, guttural moan that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. The sound was answered by another, then another, until the forest around her filled with a chorus of inhuman vocalizations. Whatever was making those sounds was getting closer, and Sarah realized with growing terror that she might have escaped one nightmare only to run directly into another. She started moving again, but more carefully now, trying to stay quiet while still putting distance between herself and the approaching sounds. But the moaning grew louder, more numerous, and she began to see shapes moving between the tree-shambling, awkward figures that moved with the distinctive gait of something fundamentally wrong. When the first one stepped into a shaft of sunlight, Sarah's scream died in her throat. It had once been human, she could see that much from the tattered clothing and general body shape. But whatever it was now, humanity was only a distant memory. Flesh hung in gray tatters from its bones. Its eyes were milky white with cataracts, and when it opened its mouth to moan again, she saw that its teeth had been replaced by something sharper, more predatory. Zombies. The forest was full of zombies. But as more of them appeared, stumbling through the underbrush with increasing agitation, Sarah noticed something that sent ice water through her veins. They weren't hunting randomly, they were all moving in the same direction. Toward her, not toward the noise she was making, not toward movement or warmth or any of the usual zombie attractants from movies and books. They were being drawn to her specifically, as if she were broadcasting some kind of signal they couldn't resist. And as understanding dawned, Sarah realized why Jenkins had been so desperate to keep them contained, why the military was involved, why they'd been under observation for 6 months. She wasn't running from the monsters. She was the monster they'd been trying to contain. Chapter 5. First Contact Horror. Sarah ran through the forest with growing panic as the moaning intensified around her. The zombies, because there was no other word for what she was seeing, seemed to be emerging from every shadow, every hidden ravine, every dark corner of the woodland. But something was wrong with their behavior. Something that defied every zombie movie she'd ever seen. They were afraid of her. The first one she encountered head-on was a woman who might have been in her 30s when she was alive. Now she was a shambling ruin in a torn hospital gown, her hair matted with dark stains, and her fingernails extended into yellowed claws. But when she saw Sarah, the creature actually stepped backward, making a sound that was part moan and part whimper. Sarah froze, watching in horrified fascination as the zombie circled her at a distance, clearly agitated but unwilling to approach directly. Others were gathering, drawn by some invisible force but maintaining the same fearful distance. They wanted something from her, she could see it in their clouded eyes, feel it in the way they reached toward her with desperate, grasping motions, but they seemed terrified to actually touch her. "What do you want?" she whispered, and immediately felt foolish for talking to them. But one of them, a man in military fatigues whose throat had been torn open some time in the past, actually tried to answer. His mouth worked soundlessly for several seconds before producing a noise that might have been help. Sarah's blood chilled. These weren't mindless monsters driven by hunger for flesh. They were still partially aware, still capable of communication, and they were in agony. The sound of pursuit was getting closer shouts from her captors, the crash of heavy boots through underbrush. She had to keep moving, but the circle of zombies was tightening around her, and their reluctance to approach was beginning to weaken. Whatever force was drawing them to her was overcoming their fear. "Please," she said, backing toward what looked like a gap in their formation. "I don't know what you want from me, but I can't help you." The woman in the hospital gown stepped closer, and Sarah could see tears streaming down her decomposed face. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, but Sarah caught the words, "Make it stop." Then the woman's remaining control shattered, and she lunged forward with a shriek of desperate hunger. Her claws raked across Sarah's arm before Sarah could dodge, and where they made contact, Sarah felt a burning sensation like acid. But it wasn't her flesh being burned, it was something being transferred, something flowing from her into the creature. The zombie woman convulsed as if she'd been electrocuted, her eyes rolling back in her head. For a moment, she looked almost human again. The gray pallor of her skin improved, her movements became more coordinated, even her torn hospital gown seemed cleaner. But then the effect reversed itself with horrifying speed, and she collapsed into a pile of ash and bone fragments. Sarah stared at the remains in shock. Whatever had just happened, she had done it. The burning sensation in her arm was fading, but she could feel something missing now, some internal resource that had been depleted. The other zombies had watched the exchange with intense focus, and now they pressed forward with renewed desperation. They weren't trying to eat her, they were trying to touch her, to make contact that would trigger the same reaction that had just destroyed their companion. "No!" Sarah screamed, pushing them away as she tried to run. But everywhere her hands made contact, the burning sensation repeated itself. Zombies caught fire with whatever energy she was unconsciously releasing, their decayed forms briefly restored before crumbling to ash. She was killing them, or freeing them, or both. The realization hit her like a physical blow as she stumbled into a clearing, leaving a trail of ash behind her. She wasn't just attracting the zombie, she was some kind of cure for their condition. A cure that destroyed them in the process of healing them. That's when she heard the voices from the campsite, carried on the wind through the trees. Marcus, Jake, and Megan were screaming, but not in pain or fear and rage. The same burning sensation she'd felt was building in her chest as she realized her friends were in danger. She ran back toward the campsite, no longer caring about pursuit or capture. The zombies tried to follow her, but she was moving too fast now, and the ones that got close enough to touch simply crumbled to ash as she passed. When she burst back into their camping area, the scene that greeted her was like something from a nightmare. Her three friends were surrounded by military personnel, but something had gone horribly wrong. Two of the soldiers were on the ground, convulsing as if they were having seizures. Jenkins was shouting into his radio, calling for medical evacuation, while the remaining soldiers had their weapons trained not on her friends but on something behind them. More zombies, dozens of them, emerging from the forest in shambling waves. But these weren't the relatively peaceful ones Sarah had encountered. These were aggressive, driven by the same desperate hunger she'd seen in the woman who touched her. "Sarah," Marcus shouted when he saw her, "something's happening to us. We can feel them coming, like they're being drawn to us." That's when she understood the full horror of their situation. All four of them were emitting whatever signal attracted the zombies. They were walking beacons, broadcasting their location to every infected creature in the forest. And from the increasing volume of moans echoing through the trees, there were a lot more infected creatures than she'd initially realized. Jenkins spotted her and raised his weapon, but his hands were shaking. "Stay back! All of you! Just stay back! We can contain this if you don't make it worse!" But containment was already failing. The perimeter was being overrun by zombies drawn from throughout the forest, and Sarah could see more soldiers retreating toward defensive positions they'd apparently prepared for exactly this scenario. "How long?" she shouted at Jenkins over the growing chaos. "How long have you been fighting these things?" 30 years, he screamed back. 30 years of keeping them contained, keeping the infection from spreading, and you people are about to undo everything. A zombie in nurse's scrubs stumbled past the defensive line and reached for Jake with desperate, grasping hands. The moment it made contact, the same burning reaction Sarah had experienced repeated itself. The creature briefly looked almost human before dissolving into ash. But Jake staggered from the contact, looking drained and pale. Whatever energy the process consumed, it was taking a toll on all of them. "We can't keep this up," Megan gasped as another zombie approached her. She tried to back away, but the creature followed with single-minded determination. When it finally made contact, the same devastating cycle repeated, momentary restoration followed by complete disintegration. But this time, Sarah noticed something else. The zombie had been wearing the remnants of a park ranger uniform, and just before it crumbled to ash, she'd seen a name tag, Collins. "Jenkins," she screamed. "That was one of your people. How many rangers have you lost to this thing?" The old ranger's face went white. "Collins went missing 3 weeks ago. We thought he'd been transferred." His voice trailed off as the implications hit him. The infection wasn't contained at all. It was still spreading, still claiming new victims, and the military operation was just barely staying ahead of it. "That's why you need us," Sarah realized with growing horror. "We're not just carriers, we're some kind of reset button. You've been using people like us to clean up your failures for 30 years. But Jenkins was already retreating with his remaining soldiers, speaking urgently into his radio. "Base, this is Jenkins. Containment has failed. Repeat, containment has failed. We have full perimeter breach and active dispersal of infected. Requesting immediate implementation of Protocol 7. "Protocol 7? Jake demanded, but the old ranger was already disappearing into the trees with his men. The four friends found themselves alone again, but now the forest around them was alive with movement. Hundreds of zombies were emerging from hidden caves, abandoned bunkers, and concealed graves 30 years' worth of failed containments. All drawn by the irresistible signal the four friends were apparently broadcasting. "We have to get out of here," Marcus said, but his voice was weak. The effort of destroying the zombies was draining all of them rapidly. "Whatever Protocol 7 is, I don't think we want to be here when it happens." Sarah looked around at the advancing horde and realized escape might not be possible. The zombies weren't mindlessly aggressive, they were desperate, driven by a need so powerful it overrode their obvious fear of what contact with the four friends would do to them. And there were so many of them now that the brief moments of restoration before destruction were becoming a constant light show of brief resurrections and instant deaths. "There," Megan pointed toward a gap in the zombie ranks. "If we can reach that trail, maybe we can outrun them." But as they started moving, Sarah felt something else, a new presence approaching from deeper in the forest, something that made the zombies themselves seem afraid. The shambling creatures were actually moving away from a particular section of the woods, clustering together as if seeking protection in numbers. "What could scare zombies?" Jake asked, following her gaze. That's when they heard the helicopter. Chapter 6. Terrible Recognition. The helicopter's rotors beat overhead like mechanical thunder, drowning out the moans of the surrounding zombies. It was military, a sleek black aircraft with no visible markings, hovering just above the tree line. As Sarah watched, figures began rappelling down ropes, moving with the precision of Special Forces operators. "Run!" Marcus shouted, but there was nowhere to go. They were surrounded by zombies on all sides, and now military personnel were descending from above. The four friends pressed together in the center of their campsite, watching their options disappear. The soldiers who landed moved with disturbing efficiency, not engaging the zombies but simply herding them back with some kind of electromagnetic devices that made the creatures recoil in apparent pain. Within minutes, they'd cleared a perimeter around the campsite and established a defensive position. But their weapons weren't pointed at the zombies, they were pointed at Sarah and her friends. "Stand down," the team leader shouted, his face hidden behind tactical gear. "Do not make any sudden movements. Do not make physical contact with each other or with us." "Contact?" Sarah called back. "What happens if we make contact?" Instead of answering, the soldier gestured towards something behind them. Sarah turned and saw what had to be Jenkins's station, a camouflaged building she hadn't noticed before, now with its doors standing open. Inside, she could see banks of monitors, communication equipment, and filing cabinets filled with what looked like decades of documentation. "Go," the soldier ordered. "All of you. Walk slowly, keep your hands visible, and don't touch anything." They had no choice. The zombies were being held back by the electromagnetic barriers, but the soldiers' weapons never wavered from their targets. Sarah led the way into the station, her friends close behind. The interior was like stepping into a command center from a science fiction movie. Multiple screens showed satellite feeds of the forest, heat signatures tracking dozens of moving figures, and what looked like medical readouts displaying constantly changing data streams. But it was the filing cabinets that drew Sarah's attention, rows and rows of them, each labeled with dates going back 30 years. "Jesus," Jake whispered, pulling open one of the drawers. Inside were medical files, psychological profiles, and incident reports. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. How many people have they brought here? Megan was examining one of the computer screens, her face pale. "Look at this. Real-time biological monitoring. Heart rates, brain activity, blood chemistry. They've been tracking our vital signs continuously since we arrived." But it was Marcus who made the discovery that changed everything. In a drawer labeled Origin Protocols, he found a thick folder marked Patient 0, Initial Outbreak. Inside were photographs, medical records, and incident reports from 1,995. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you need to see this." The photograph showed a research facility in Colorado, the same facility Jenkins had mentioned, but these weren't recent pictures. They were from 30 years ago, and they showed a containment breach that had killed dozens of researchers and spawned the first generation of what would later become the zombie plague. But it was the medical records that made Sarah's blood run cold. Patient 0 hadn't been some random victim of a lab accident. It had been a deliberate test subject, a young woman who'd been exposed to an experimental pathogen designed to enhance human immune systems. The pathogen had worked exactly as intended, creating an immune response so powerful it could cure any infection, heal any wound, even reverse death itself. But the cure came with a price. It was transmissible, and in anyone whose immune system couldn't handle the enhancement, it created the shambling, desperate creatures they'd been encountering. "That's why they need us," Sarah realized, her voice barely a whisper. We're descendants of patient zero. Our immune systems can handle the pathogen, but we're also carriers. Every person we touch, every surface we contaminate, every breath we exhale, we're spreading it. Marcus was reading through more files, his engineering mind processing the technical details. It gets worse. According to this, the pathogen has been evolving. Each generation of carriers is more potent than the last, and we're apparently fourth-generation carriers, which means we're weapons of mass destruction, Jake finished, walking biological warfare agents. Megan had found another set of files, these ones marked containment failures, subject disposals. Her face was white as she read. They don't let anyone leave, do they? All these people over the years, they're all dead, killed when containment became too difficult. That's when the truth hit them with full force. They weren't test subjects in some ongoing experiment. They were the last step in a 30-year cleanup operation. Jenkins and his people had been systematically tracking down descendants of Patient Zero, bringing them to remote locations like this one, and eliminating them to prevent further spread of the pathogen. The camping trip, the isolated location, the careful monitoring it had all been preparation for their execution. Protocol 7, Sarah said quietly. That's what he called for when containment failed. I bet that's the sterilization protocol. Kill the carriers, burn the forest, cover it all up as some kind of natural disaster. As if summoned by her words, Jenkins's voice crackled over the station's communication system. Base, this is Jenkins. Site 40. 7 is fully compromised. Subjects have accessed Origin files and are aware of their status, requesting immediate authorization for Protocol 7 implementation. The response came back in a cold, clinical voice. Authorization granted. Begin sterilization sequence. All personnel evacuate to minimum safe distance. Initiation in T-minus 15 minutes. 15 minutes. They had 15 minutes before this entire section of forest and everything in it would be incinerated to prevent the pathogen from spreading further. The helicopter, Marcus said, if we can get to the helicopter. But even as he said it, they could hear the aircraft powering up, preparing to leave. Through the station windows, they watched the soldiers retreating to extraction points, abandoning their positions as the zombies pressed forward again. They're not taking any chances, Megan observed grimly. No prisoners, no survivors, no witnesses. Sarah looked around at the files, the monitors, the evidence of 30 years of systematic murder disguised as disease control. All those people, all those families who'd never known what happened to their loved ones, and now it was their turn. Unless they could find a way to escape in the next 14 minutes. But first, they had to get past an army of zombies who were drawn to them like addicts to their drug of choice, soldiers who'd been ordered to kill them on sight, and a forest that was about to become a crematorium. The monitors around them began flashing red warnings. Sterilization sequence initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately. 13 minutes and counting. Chapter 7. The Descent Accelerates. The red warning lights painted everything in hellish crimson as Sarah and her friends realized the full scope of their situation. Through the station windows, they could see the zombies pressing closer now that the soldiers had withdrawn. The electromagnetic barriers were failing one by one, and the shambling figures were advancing with renewed determination. We can't go out there, Jake said, watching a group of zombies in torn hospital scrubs stumble toward the building. The moment they touch us, we'll be drained dry. And we can't stay here, Megan added, pointing at a countdown timer that had appeared on one of the monitors. 11 minutes until they turn this place into a parking lot. Marcus was frantically searching through the station's equipment, looking for anything that might help. There has to be an emergency protocol, some kind of escape route. You don't build a facility like this, without a backup plan. But Sarah was studying the monitors more carefully, watching the heat signatures moving through the forest. Look at the patterns. The zombies aren't randomly distributed, they're following specific paths, like they're being channeled. She was right. The infected creatures were moving along what appeared to be predetermined routes, avoiding certain areas entirely. It was as if the forest itself had been designed to funnel them toward specific locations. Killing fields. She realized, this whole operation isn't just about containing individual carriers. They've been using this place as a disposal site for decades. All those paths lead to incineration points. A new sound cut through the moaning of the zombies, a high-pitched whine that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. On the monitors, they could see new heat signatures emerging from underground locations throughout the forest. Whatever was making that sound, there were a lot of them. "What now?" Jake muttered, but his question was answered when the first of the new arrivals came into view through the windows. These weren't zombies. They were something worse. The creatures that emerged from hidden bunkers moved with purpose and intelligence. They still bore the basic human form, but they'd been changed by the pathogen in ways that went far beyond the shambling infected they'd encountered before. Their skin had a translucent quality that revealed the network of veins and arteries beneath, all pulsing with an unnatural bioluminescence. Their eyes were completely white but seemed to track movement with disturbing accuracy. And they were fast. "Fifth generation," Marcus whispered, reading from one of the files he'd pulled. "The pathogen eventually stops creating zombies and starts creating these things. Enhanced humans with hive mind intelligence and accelerated physical capabilities." "How enhanced?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Her answer came when one of the creatures noticed them through the station window. It moved with liquid grace, covering the distance to the building in seconds and striking the reinforced glass with enough force to spiderweb the entire panel. "Enhanced enough," Megan said grimly. The creature struck again, and this time the window gave way entirely, but instead of climbing through immediately, it paused and seemed to study them with those unsettling white eyes. When it spoke, its voice was perfectly clear and utterly calm. "You're causing them pain," it said, gesturing toward the zombies. "Every time they touch you, you burn away pieces of what they used to be. They remember being human, you know. They remember love, fear, hope, and you're destroying those memories one contact at a time." Sarah felt sick. "We didn't know. We didn't choose this." "Choice is irrelevant. Effect is what matters." The creature tilted its head like a curious bird. "You're fourth-generation carriers. Your bodies produce the pathogen in concentrations that are toxic to earlier generations. You're walking death to anyone who's been infected longer than you have." "Then stay away from us," Jake said, but he was backing away from the broken window. The creature made a sound that might have been laughter. "We can't. The pathogen creates dependency. The longer someone is infected, the more they need contact with fresher carriers to maintain stability. Those zombies outside, they're dying slowly, day by day, unless they can make contact with someone like you." "But contact destroys them," Marcus protested. "Yes, it's a perfect system, isn't it? The pathogen ensures its own propagation by creating an endless cycle of need and destruction." The creature's white eyes fixed on each of them in turn. "And you four are the apex predators in this ecosystem. You don't just spread the infection, you consume it." More of the enhanced creatures were appearing at other windows now, but none of them were attempting to break in. They seemed content to watch and wait. "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "To offer you a choice," the first creature replied. "In 8 minutes, this facility will be sterilized. Everything within a 5-mile radius will be incinerated. but there are ways out underground passages that lead beyond the kill zone. We can show you." "In exchange for what?" The creature's expression didn't change, but something in its posture shifted. "Partnership. You help us establish new colonies beyond this containment zone, and we'll help you survive what's coming." "New colonies?" Megan's voice was horrified. "You're talking about spreading this infection deliberately." "It's going to spread anyway. The pathogen is too adaptive, too persistent to be contained forever. The only question is whether it spreads randomly through failed containments like this one, or whether it's guided by intelligence toward specific objectives." Sarah looked at the countdown timer. 7 minutes remaining. Outside, the zombies were pressing closer to the building, their desperate moaning growing louder. The helicopter had long since departed, taking with it any hope of conventional rescue. "And if we refuse your offer," she asked, "then you burn with everything else in 6.5 minutes. Along with roughly 300 infected who've been living in this forest for the past 3 decades, most of whom were brought here under the same false pretenses you were." The moral weight of that statement hit her like a physical blow. 300 people who'd been lied to, manipulated, and condemned to a living death in service of a containment protocol that had clearly failed decades ago. "Show us the passages," Marcus said suddenly. "Marcus, no," Jake protested. "You can't seriously be considering this." "Look around." Marcus gestured at the monitors, the files, the evidence of 30 years of systematic murder. These people have been playing God with human lives for 3 decades. Maybe it's time someone else made the decisions. The enhanced creature that had been speaking moved with fluid grace to a section of the floor Sarah hadn't noticed before. When it pressed against a seemingly solid panel, a hidden entrance opened, revealing stairs leading down into darkness. "The tunnels connect to the old mine system," it explained. "Miles of passages that predate the research facility. We've been expanding them for years, preparing for this day." Sarah looked at her friends Jake, torn between moral revulsion and practical necessity, Megan studying the creature with scientific fascination, Marcus already moving toward the hidden entrance. The countdown timer showed 5 minutes remaining. "If we go with you," she said slowly, "what happens to the people in the towns nearby, the cities beyond the forest?" The creature's white eyes seemed to glow brighter for a moment. "That depends on how quickly you learn to control what you are, and how willing you are to accept what you're becoming." 4 minutes. Sarah made her choice. Chapter 8. Horrific Understanding. The tunnel system beneath the forest was vast beyond anything Sarah had imagined. As they descended through the hidden entrance, LED strips embedded in the walls revealed passages that stretched for miles in every direction. The enhanced creatures moved through the tunnels with the confidence of long-time residents, their bioluminescent veins providing additional lighting in the deeper sections. "How long have you been building this?" Megan asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear as they walked through what was clearly an engineered environment. 30 years, their guide replied. "Every failed containment, every new batch of subjects brought to the surface, we've been preparing for the day when the sterilization protocols would finally fail." They passed through chambers carved from the living rock, each one equipped with sophisticated life support systems and what looked like medical equipment. Some contained zombies in various stages of decay, suspended in specialized pods that seemed to slow their deterioration. Others held enhanced creatures like their guide, but in different stages of transformation. "You're studying the pathogen," Marcus realized, "trying to control its effects." "Trying to perfect them," the creature corrected. "The infection as it currently exists is unstable. It creates too many zombies, not enough enhanced subjects. The ratio needs to be reversed if we're going to establish sustainable colonies." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. You're talking about deliberately infecting people. Mass infection. Selective infection. The pathogen responds differently to different genetic markers. With the right screening, we can ensure that 90% of new subjects become enhanced rather than becoming zombies. They entered a vast central chamber where dozens of enhanced creatures were working at computer terminals and monitoring equipment that rivaled anything Sarah had seen in the surface station. The screen showed real-time data from locations across the continent, population centers, genetic databases, infection vectors. "My God," Jake whispered. "You've been planning this for years." "Decades," their guide confirmed. "Every piece of data collected from surface subjects like yourselves has been used to refine our understanding of optimal infection conditions. You four represent the culmination of that research, fourth-generation carriers with unprecedented pathogen concentrations." "Which means what exactly?" Sarah demanded. Instead of answering directly, the creature led them to a special chamber where the walls were lined with what appeared to be biological growth medium. As they watched, samples of their blood, when had they taken blood samples, were being introduced to cultures of various bacteria and viruses. The results were immediate and terrifying. Every pathogen in the cultures was instantly neutralized, broken down at the molecular level by whatever was in their blood. But more than that, the growth medium itself began to change, developing the same bioluminescent properties they'd seen in the enhanced creatures. "You're not just immune to other diseases," the creature explained. "You're immune to everything: radiation, toxins, aging, even physical trauma to some degree. But the real gift is what you can do to others." On another screen, they watched archived footage of previous subjects, people like themselves who'd been brought to similar facilities over the years. The recording showed the same sequence they'd experienced: confusion, realization, horror, and finally, transformation. But these subjects hadn't been sterilized. They'd been taken underground, and the footage showed their gradual change from terrified victims to willing participants in what was clearly a much larger operation. "You're building an army," Megan said quietly. "We're building a new species," the creature replied. "Humanity's successor. The pathogen isn't a disease, it's evolution." Sarah watched the screens with growing horror as the scope of the operation became clear. This wasn't just about their forest, their facility. There were similar underground complexes scattered across the continent, all connected by tunnel systems, all working toward the same goal. "How many people know about this?" she asked. "On the surface, a few hundred in government and military positions. They think they're containing a biological weapon. They don't realize they're actually facilitating its spread every time they run a sterilization protocol." "Because the sterilizations don't work," Marcus said with dawning understanding. "They kill the zombies and most of the enhanced subjects, yes. But they also scatter pathogen spores across hundreds of square miles. Spores that lie dormant until they encounter suitable hosts. Every sterilization creates new infection vectors, new outbreaks that require new containments." The creature gestured to a wall-mounted display showing a map of North America dotted with red circles. Each mark represents a sterilization site from the past 30 years. Notice the pattern? Sarah did notice it, and it made her sick. The sites formed a rough spiral pattern spreading outward from the original research facility in Colorado. Each sterilization had created new infections further from the center, requiring new containments, new sterilizations, new spread. "You've been using the government's own containment protocols to spread the infection across the continent," she whispered. "They've been using themselves. We just provided guidance when opportunities arose." The creature's white eyes seemed to glow with satisfaction. "Every fourth-generation carrier they've identified and brought to facilities like this one has been a gift to our cause. Because we don't just spread the infection, Jake said, the pieces falling into place. We concentrate it, refine it, make it more potent. Exactly. And now, with the sterilization about to begin above us, you'll have no choice but to join us. The surface world thinks you're dead. Your families will be told you died in a tragic camping accident. You have no legal identity, no way to return to your old lives. Sarah looked around the chamber at the dozens of enhanced creatures working with calm efficiency toward their apocalyptic goals. Some of them still looked mostly human, while others had undergone transformations that left them barely recognizable as having once been people, but all of them moved with the same purposeful determination. "What if we refuse?" she asked. "What if we won't help you?" The creature tilted its head in that unsettling bird-like gesture. "Then you'll remain here until the pathogen completes its work on your systems. Fourth-generation carriers don't stay human forever. Eventually, you'll become like us, and then cooperation won't be a choice, it will be instinct." As if to demonstrate the point, Sarah became aware of a subtle change in her own perception. The enhanced creatures no longer looked quite as alien as they had when she'd first seen them. Their movements seemed more graceful than disturbing, their bioluminescent veins more beautiful than horrifying. The pathogen was already changing her, altering her brain chemistry to make her more compatible with their group mind. "How long?" she asked quietly. "For complete transformation? 6 months, perhaps a year, but you'll start feeling the pull much sooner than that. The need to be with others like yourself, the discomfort around uninfected humans, the growing conviction that what we're doing is not just necessary but righteous." Above them, Sarah could hear the distant rumble of aircraft engines. The sterilization was beginning, and with it, any chance of returning to their old lives was being literally burned away. But even as the reality of their situation sank in, she found herself thinking about the 300 infected souls who were about to be incinerated above their heads. People who'd been lied to and manipulated just as she and her friends had been. People who deserved better than being collateral damage in a war they'd never asked to join. "The zombies," she said suddenly. "The ones still on the surface. They're going to die." "Yes," the creature acknowledged without apparent emotion. "And you're just going to let that happen?" For the first time, the creature's composed expression flickered. They're casualties of a war that began long before any of us were born. Their sacrifice serves the greater good. But Sarah was already moving, heading back toward the tunnel entrance they'd come through. She could feel the pathogen in her system responding to her emotional state, filling her with energy and purpose. "Sarah, don't," Marcus called after her. "You can't save them." She looked back at her friends Marcus, torn between logic and loyalty, Jake and Megan watching with growing understanding of what she was planning. "Maybe not," she said, "but I can try to give them what they really want." And with that, she ran back toward the surface, toward the fire that was already beginning to fall from the sky. Chapter 9. No Escape. Sarah emerged from the tunnel entrance into a world transformed by approaching apocalypse. The forest was bathed in the orange glow of incendiary devices dropped from aircraft high overhead, and the air itself seemed to burn with chemical fire. But what struck her most was the sound, not the roar of flames or the rumble of aircraft, but the singing. The zombies scattered throughout the forest were singing. It wasn't the mindless moaning she'd heard before, but actual songs, fragments of lullabies, half-remembered hymns, children's rhymes that they must have known when they were still human. Their voices were ruined by decades of decay, but the melodies were unmistakable, heartbreaking in their simple humanity. They knew they were going to die, and they were trying to remember who they used to be. Sarah ran toward the nearest group, a cluster of zombies in hospital scrubs who were harmonizing on what sounded like Amazing Grace. When they saw her coming, their song faltered, but they didn't flee. Instead, they reached toward her with desperate hope, understanding somehow that she represented their only chance for peace. The first contact burned through her like electricity. She felt the zombies' memories flooding into her system, a woman named Jennifer who'd been a pediatric nurse before the infection took her. She'd been caring for sick children when the pathogen arrived at her hospital, and she'd stayed at her post even as her colleagues fled, trying to protect the kids until the very end. As Jennifer's essence merged with Sarah's, the zombie's decayed form briefly resumed its original appearance, a young woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. For just a moment, Jennifer was human again, whole again, at peace. Then she crumbled to ash, and Sarah staggered from the energy drain. But there were so many more. They pressed forward in waves, each one carrying decades of trapped humanity, each one desperate for the release that only Sarah's touch could provide. A park ranger who'd tried to evacuate campers before succumbing to infection. A scientist who'd realized too late that her research was being used for weapons development. A child who'd been brought here by parents who thought they were saving him. Each contact drained more of Sarah's strength, but she couldn't stop. These people had been prisoners for decades, trapped in decaying bodies with intact memories, forced to watch themselves become monsters while retaining full awareness of their humanity. Sarah. Marcus's voice cut through the singing. He'd followed her to the surface, along with Jake and Megan. You can't save them all. There are hundreds of them. I have to try, she gasped, reaching for another zombie. This one, a man in military fatigues who might have been a soldier before the infection. His memories hit her like a tsunami. Tours of duty, a wife and children he'd never see again. The growing realization that his government had been lying to him about the nature of his missions. You're killing yourself, Megan shouted, catching Sarah as she nearly collapsed from the latest energy drain. Whatever this process is doing to them, it's burning you out. But Sarah could feel something else happening. Each contact wasn't just draining her, it was teaching her. The zombie's memories were showing her things about the pathogen, about the infection, about the true scope of what had been happening for 30 years. The enhanced creatures underground weren't the end goal of the pathogen's evolution. They were just another stage, another stepping stone towards something larger. And the government officials who thought they were containing a biological weapon weren't just wrong, they were actively being manipulated by something that had been playing a much longer game. It's not random, she said, her voice weak but urgent. The infections, the containments, the sterilizations, none of it's random. There's something controlling the pathogen, directing its evolution. Above them, more incendiary devices were falling, and the forest was beginning to burn in earnest. The chemical fire consumed everything it touched, leaving nothing but ash and scorched earth. In minutes, the entire area would be sterilized. We have to get back underground, Jake urged, but Sarah was looking at something else, a figure approaching through the smoke and fire. It was Jenkins, but not as they'd seen him before. His uniform was burned and torn, and his face bore the unmistakable signs of infection. But unlike the zombies, he was still fully aware, still in control of his faculties. 30 years, he said, his voice carrying clearly over the crackling flames. 30 years I've been fighting this thing, and I finally understand. It's not trying to destroy humanity, it's trying to replace us. He gestured toward the burning forest, where zombies were still singing their final songs as the fire consumed them. Every person who dies here becomes part of it. Every sterilization feeds more genetic material into the collective. We're not fighting an infection, we're fighting evolution itself. Then help us stop it, Sarah pleaded, but Jenkins was shaking his head. You can't stop evolution, girl. You can only choose whether you're going to be part of it or be left behind. He held up a radio that was crackling with transmissions from across the continent. It's not just here. Sites all over North America are reporting containment failures. The pathogen's going active everywhere at once. The radio chatter confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Military bases, research facilities, even major population centers were reporting outbreaks. Whatever had been dormant for 30 years was now waking up, and it was coordinated. Patient 0, she whispered, understanding flooding through her. She never died, did she? She's still out there, still controlling the pathogen's spread. Jenkins nodded grimly, and now she's calling her children home. As if summoned by his words, Sarah felt Ita pull unlike anything she'd experienced before. Not the desperate hunger of the zombies or the cold calculation of the enhanced creatures, but something vast and ancient and utterly alien. Something that had been waiting patiently for 30 years for its network to grow large enough to support its true objectives. "We have to warn people," Megan said, but even as she spoke, they could all hear it now, a sound like singing, but not from the dying zombies around them. This was coming from every infected person across the continent, a harmonic convergence that was calling the pathogen's scattered children to unite. "Too late," Jenkins said sadly. "Has been for 30 years. The only question now is whether you're going to join willingly or be dragged along." The fire was closing in around them, but Sarah could see the tunnel entrance still accessible behind them. They could escape underground, join the enhanced creatures, become part of whatever the pathogen was building. Or they could stay on the surface and burn with the evidence of 30 years of failed containment. As she looked at her friends, Marcus still believing they could find a rational solution, Jake ready to fight against impossible odds, Megan torn between scientific fascination and human horror, Sarah realized the truth. There was no escape. There never had been. The pathogen had been patient, building its network one infection at a time, one failed containment at a time, one generation of carriers at a time. And now it was ready to reveal what it had really been creating all along. Above them, the aircraft were beginning to withdraw, their sterilization protocols complete. In a few hours, official reports would declare the site successfully contained, another biological hazard eliminated. But deep underground, in tunnels that stretched across continents, something vast and patient and utterly inhuman was finally ready to come home. And Sarah and her friends were about to become its first ambassadors to the surface world.